On Earth, a newborn's blood oxygen should be above 95%. Inside the Ares Prime Medical Bay, the first human born off-world was a critical 68% and declining. This was more than a medical crisis. It was the first profound collision between human biology and Martian physics. His body wasn't failing. It was simply obeying the physics of a world for which it was never designed. The hum inside the Ares Prime Medical Bay was a low, constant pressure against the ears, a manufactured sound designed to mask the absolute silence of the world outside. Dr. Hannah Brooks felt the vibration in the soles of her sterile clogs as she traced a finger along a shimmering green line on the main diagnostic screen. The line represented Elena Petrova's cardiac output, and like nearly every other metric displayed in the softly lit room, it was a biological lie. It was stable, yes, but it was the stability of a new and unwritten textbook. For 9 months, Elena's body had been a closed system, operating under a foreign set of physical rules. On Earth, gravity relentlessly pulled fluids downward, forcing the cardiovascular system to fight a constant war to perfuse the brain. Here, in 0.38 grams, that war was a minor skirmish. Elena's plasma volume had shifted. Her heart had subtly remodeled itself to handle a lower load, and the developing fetus within her had known nothing but this gentle, persistent pull. The data reflected this new normal: a lower resting heart rate, reduced arterial pressure, and a unique pattern of fetal heart rate variability that had no earthbound analog. Hannah switched the display, pulling up the latest fetal magnetocardiogram. The abstract loops and vectors resolved into a three-dimensional model of a tiny beating heart. She had spent a career studying mammalian development in microgravity, poring over data from generations of mice born on orbital stations, creatures that lived, bred, and died without ever feeling the full weight of a planet. That research provided the only theoretical scaffolding for this moment, but it was fragile. A mouse was not a human, and orbit was not Mars. Anything? Elena's voice was quiet, raspy with the fatigue of late-term pregnancy. She lay propped on her side, a web of wireless sensors adhering to her skin. Her gaze was fixed on the ceiling panel, but her mind was clearly on the numbers Dr. Brooks was scrutinizing. "Everything is holding steady," Hannah replied, keeping her own voice level. It was the truth, but it was an insufficient one. The baselines they had established over the preceding months were their only guide. To the team of specialists watching this same data stream back on Earth, a signal already 8 minutes old, Elena's condition would look like a cascade of precursor warnings for eclampsia or cardiac insufficiency. But here it was simply Tuesday. A contraction began, a silent tightening Hannah observed first as a sharp peak on the uterine activity monitor. Elena's eyes closed, her breathing deepening as she worked through it. The colony, all 112 of them, knew. The internal comms were silent, all non-essential activity paused. They were geologists, botanists, and engineers, but today they were simply a crowd gathered in a planetary waiting room, holding a collective breath across sealed habitats and subterranean labs. They were waiting for a sound that had never before been heard beyond the thin blue atmosphere of Earth. Hannah watched the fetal heart rate. It dipped, as expected during a contraction, but the recovery was sluggish, a slow, climbing curve that spoke of a system under a type of stress she could only theorize about. It was the weight, not the 38% of Earth's gravity, but the immense crushing weight of being the first. The data was more than a medical record. It was a biological signal sent across the deep, star-dusted void. It was a message from a frontier that was no longer just a place you went, but a force that was changing what you were. Far behind them, light minutes away, the protective embrace of the Van Allen belts was a forgotten chapter in a book humanity had just closed. Here, a new one was being written, one heartbeat at a time. The first cry was thin but clear, a startling blade of sound that cut through the sterile hum of the medical bay. It was the sound of a new world beginning. A brief, euphoric wave of relief washed over the room. Smiles were exchanged, and for a handful of seconds, the immense distance from Earth vanished. They were just people welcoming a child. Dr. Hannah Brooks watched as the small, writhing form was placed on the neonatal resuscitation table, his skin a mottled purple that should have rapidly pinked up. It did not. The cry choked off into a weak, gasping cough. A second later, the pulse oximeter clipped to the infant's foot began to shriek, its pitch a sharp digital panic. The number on the screen, a vital measure of blood oxygen saturation, was plummeting. 85, 79, 72. A dusky blue tinge, cyanosis, crept across the baby's lips and nail beds. Her assistant, a young medic named Kenji, immediately began standard protocols, clearing the airway and applying a positive pressure ventilation mask. No obstruction.
Lungs are clear on auscultation,
Kenji reported, his voice tight. But the numbers kept falling. The efforts were futile, like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The oxygen was getting into the lungs, but it was not reaching the rest of the body. The frantic messages from Earth would arrive in 16 minutes, round trip. They would be useless, a medical ghost whispering advice for a scenario that no longer existed. Hannah silenced the alarms with a swift gesture, the sudden quiet amplifying the tension. Her eyes weren't on the ventilator or the oxygen levels. They were locked on the echocardiogram she had ordered the moment the baby was born. On the screen, the tiny heart pulsed erratically. She saw it instantly, the foramen ovale, a shunt between the atria that is meant to snap shut with the first breath, remained wide open. The ductus arteriosus, another fetal bypass, was also patent. Blood was shunting away from the pulmonary circuit, bypassing the lungs in a life-threatening echo of its time in the womb. The transition had failed. On Earth, the pressure changes from a newborn's powerful first cries, driven by a heart strong from fighting a lifetime of gravity, would force this new circulatory architecture into place. This heart, however, had never known that fight. It was a perfect, efficient engine for a low-gravity environment, but it lacked the raw ventricular power to slam the biological doors shut and redirect blood to the lungs against the new pressure of a breathable atmosphere. It wasn't a defect, it was an adaptation that was now killing him. "Stop ventilation," Hannah commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "He's not in respiratory failure, he's in cardiovascular collapse." She turned to the cryostasis unit. "Initiate neonatal hypothermic protocol. Core temperature target, 33.5 degrees Celsius. Cooling the body would slow the metabolic rate, buying the brain precious time by reducing its desperate need for oxygen that wasn't arriving. But it was a stopgap, not a solution." She unlocked a refrigerated medical safe with her thumbprint and withdrew a single lead-lined vial. The label was stark white, marked only with a long alphanumeric sequence. It contained a tailored adeno-associated virus, a harmless vector carrying a synthetic genetic payload. The therapy, developed and tested only on gestating rodents during long-duration missions on the ISS, was designed to trigger the rapid expression of transcription factors that promote the maturation and hypertrophy of myocardial cells. It would, in theory, force the heart muscle to strengthen itself on an accelerated timescale. It had never been used on a human. It was a tool for a future no one was sure would arrive. Ignoring the bewildered, questioning stares from her team, Dr. Hannah Brooks drew the clear fluid into a syringe. She was not just treating a patient, she was intervening in a speciation event. With a steady hand, she administered the full dose into the infant's umbilical venous catheter. The gene therapy, a cascade of silent molecular instructions, rushed toward the tiny, faltering heart that was not made for this world, tasked with rebuilding it for the next. The infant lay in the transparent biocradle, a small, still form suspended in a web of delicate wires and nutrient lines. His body, cooled to a precise 33.5 degrees Celsius, was a portrait of suspended animation. The violent metabolic storm had passed, leaving behind an unnerving quiet. Dr. Hannah Brooks stood watch, her attention fixed on the telemetry flowing from the child. The critical metric was no longer oxygen saturation, but myocardial electrical potential. The gene therapy was now a silent passenger in billions of cells, its microscopic work of rewriting cellular destiny far too subtle for any monitor to display directly. There was only the waiting. The high-priority message arrived 9 minutes after Hannah had injected the viral vector. It flashed on the main screen in the command habitat, a crimson flag from Earth demanding immediate attention. Colony Director Thorn read the text twice, his jaw tightening with each word. The message was from the highest level of the Ares Program Medical Command. It was clear, concise, and utterly disconnected from their reality. It spoke of unexplained signal loss, anomalous neonatal vitals, and presumed perinatal asphyxia. Based on the 8-minute-old data of the initial collapse, Earth had concluded the infant had suffered a conventional birth complication. The directive was absolute. Cease any and all unsanctioned experimental protocols. Revert immediately to Standard Neonatal Resuscitation Protocol 7-ALPHA. Acknowledge. Aris walked to the medical bay, the tablet containing the message feeling unnaturally heavy in his hand. He found Dr. Brooks observing a live microscopy feed showing a sample of the infant's blood. "Hannah," he said, his voice low, "we have a directive." He didn't need to show her the tablet. She knew what it would say. "They're seeing the symptom, not the cause," she said without turning around. "They're trying to fly a plane with a nautical chart." Protocol 7-ALPHA is positive pressure ventilation. Doing that now would blow out his alveoli and put catastrophic strain on his right ventricle. It would prove fatal to his unique physiology. "They are mandating a return to terrestrial protocols," Aris stated, making it a fact, not a question. "They are classifying your intervention as unprecedented clinical intervention." Finally, she turned to face him. Her expression wasn't defensive or angry. It was one of profound, weary certainty. "What I am doing is treating a Martian. Their protocols are for a different species of patient. Look," she pointed to the echocardiogram, which was still running. "The pressure gradient between the pulmonary artery and the aorta is still negligible. His circulation remains functionally fetal." Earth's methods are predicated on a powerful left ventricle that can force the entire system to remap itself after the first breath. His heart doesn't have that power because it never needed it. We are building it for him, molecule by molecule. Their orders are based on a planet with 3 times this gravity. Aris looked from Hannah's resolute face to the child in the biocradle. He was the administrator, the link in a chain of command that stretched over 100 million kilometers back to a world of blue skies and deep oceans. His career was built on procedure, on following the mission plans that had been simulated 1,000 times. But the simulations had never accounted for this. A biological divergence so fundamental it rendered the rulebook obsolete. He was being asked to trust a protocol from a distant authority over the direct, observable evidence of the physicist, the biologist, and the doctor standing right in front of him. The silence stretched. It was no longer just the absence of sound, but the presence of a choice. He could follow the order and enforce Earth's will, ensuring that if the child died, it was under approved, documented, and legally defensible procedures. Or he could sever that chain of command, trusting his people and the science happening in this room, and in doing so, take the first definitive step away from being a remote outpost and toward becoming a self-determining world. He walked over to the bay's internal comm panel and pressed the button. "This is Director Thorn," he said, his voice steady and clear, broadcast to the entire colony. "Medical authority for the neonatal patient is exclusively delegated to Dr. Brooks. Her directives will be followed without exception. Command out." He turned back to Hannah. He hadn't defied Earth. He had simply ignored it. In the vast, uncaring silence between the planets, it was an act that was both infinitesimally small and immeasurably large. 48 hours later, the alarms were silent. The infant, swaddled in a thermoregulating blanket in a standard open cot, slept peacefully. His parents, Elena Petrova and lead geologist Samir Das, had named him Kenji, after the young medic who had first fought to save him. The name felt right, a link to the first moment of crisis and the community that had weathered it. Kenji's skin was a healthy, uniform pink, and his tiny chest rose and fell with the steady, unlabored rhythm of a perfectly functioning system. By all outward appearances, he was a miracle. Dr. Hannah Brooks knew he was something far more complex. The final diagnostic results were displayed on her private terminal, a series of graphs and models that told a story of profound biological alteration. The gene therapy had worked with an efficacy that was both astonishing and terrifying. It had acted like a powerful architectural catalyst, accelerating myocardial growth and remodeling the heart's 4 chambers. The infant's left ventricle, once too weak to manage the pressure of pulmonary circulation, was now a marvel of efficiency, perfectly tuned to the light gravitational load and the colony's oxygen-rich atmosphere. His stroke volume, cardiac output, and blood pressure were rock solid, forming a new, stable baseline for human life on Mars. But that was the problem. The system was now too efficient. Hannah ran a simulation, a predictive model that had been one of her life's works. She inputted Kenji's cardiovascular data and changed a single variable, gravity, increasing it from 0.38 g to a full 1 g. The model's output was immediate and brutal. On Earth, the hyper-efficient heart would be forced to pump against a massively increased systemic vascular resistance as gravity pulled blood into the lower extremities. The organ, optimized for a low-load environment, would strain against the pressure like an over-revved engine. Within hours, the simulation showed acute decompensated heart failure. Within days, total cardiac collapse. The intervention that had saved his life had also marooned him. He was now biologically bound to the red planet. A return to the world of his parents was not a journey, it was a death sentence. The cradle of humanity, with its deep gravity well and dense atmosphere, was now as hostile to him as the vacuum of space. She found Elena and Samir watching their son, their faces etched with a quiet awe that overshadowed the exhaustion. "He's stable," Hannah said, her voice gentle. "Completely. The therapy was successful." "So he'll be all right?" Elena asked, her gaze never leaving Kenji. "Here, yes," Hannah confirmed. "He will be more than all right. His body is perfectly adapted to this world, more so than any of us." The unspoken part of her sentence hung in the air. More than any of us, and therefore unlike any of us. Samir, his scientist's mind always probing, seemed to grasp the implication first. "Adapted," he repeated slowly. "You mean permanently?" Hannah met his gaze and gave a single slow nod. The dream of a foothold, of an outpost from which humanity could come and go, had ended. The first child born beyond the sheltering magnetic field of the Van Allen belts was not a colonist. He was a native. Later that evening, alone in her quiet office, Dr. Hannah Brooks opened a new log entry. She dictated her final report, detailing the biophysical reality of the situation in precise clinical language. She documented the cellular changes, the circulatory dynamics, and the grim certainty of the physiological models. When the facts were laid bare, she paused, then added a concluding summary, a note for the history that was now unfolding. Medical log, entry 437, subject, Kenji Petrova Das. The patient is no longer considered in critical condition. He is, by all metrics, the healthiest individual on this planet. The ethical debate regarding the use of unsanctioned gene therapy is, from a clinical standpoint, moot. It was the only viable path to survival. The long-term consequence, however, is a fundamental biological divergence. The subject's cardiovascular system is now permanently and irrevocably optimized for a low-gravity environment. A return to Earth is medically impossible. We set out to expand our species' reach, but we have instead initiated its divergence. We came here as explorers, but in saving this child, we have become the progenitors of a new humanity, one forever tied to this world. Kenji is not a human born on Mars, he is the first Martian. The story began with a body failing by every metric we understand, a catastrophic number on a screen that signified an emergency. But it ends with the profound realization that this wasn't a failure at all. It was the birth of a new biological baseline. Kenji's survival marks the moment humanity's biological narrative shifted, creating a new lineage that may be permanently adapted to the Martian frontier. His body wasn't broken, it was simply obeying the impartial physics of the only home it has ever known. Exploring these immense near-future possibilities is what we do here at Tech Dissect Official, where the science of today meets the stories of tomorrow. The decisions made in that medical bay force us to confront the choices that truly await us in space. So we want to ask you, when Colony Director Thorn chose to defy Earth's direct orders and trust Dr. Brooks's radical intervention, was it an act of justified medical necessity or the first quiet act of colonial rebellion? Thanks for joining us for this dissection, and we'll see you on the next one. But as you go, consider this. Now that he is biologically bound to Mars, who on Earth gets to decide the legal rights of a child who can never set foot there?